The N-Gage is a well-documented failure. Nokia even lied about the sales figures. They said within the first 2 weeks 400,000 units were sold. Independent research said that 5,000 units sold in the US and only 800 units sold in the UK in the first 2 weeks. Apparently, these 400,000 units they were talking about were just the units pushed out to stores. The actual sales figures for the US and the UK combined in the first 2 weeks were only 5,800 units. That's a highly marketed product selling only 5.8k units. Hey everyone, as always Jarek here, but I'm sure you've heard about the N-Gage's failure plenty before. That's not what this video is about. What if I told you that there's actually a few decent games still on that platform that people haven't heard of? Well, there are, and the game I'm going to be covering today is a first-person shooter called Ashen. Now, if you look around on the internet, you don't see much about it. You see a few people doing long plays of it, but you don't really see any video reviews. I mean, hell, here's the whole Wikipedia page. The story section is 3 sentences long. So let's change that. Let's talk about the game today, right after this sponsor. Content creation is my career. I've been doing it for a very long time now, and that's why I always encourage people to express their own creativity through their own content. That's why I've teamed up with Wondershare Filmora 10, today's sponsor. Wondershare Filmora 10 is editing software aimed for all skill levels, from the beginner to the professional. It includes preset templates like effects, filters, transactions, and even tons of royalty-free music. Wondershare Filmora 10 just released their newest version. It comes with some new features like auto highlight and audio normalization. To auto highlight, simply import the video, right-click on said video, and click auto highlight. This will even give you a length option for certain websites like TikTok or YouTube Shorts. But that's it. To normalize the audio, you simply highlight everything you want to normalize, right-click on it, click audio, then checkmark normalize audio. That's it. This will ensure that parts of your videos don't get super quiet and then super loud. If you ever wanted to get into content creation but it just seems complicated, because at a glance it really does, then Wondershare Filmora 10 is actually a great piece of software to pick up. Check that link down below. Also, their Filmora Fest is still ongoing if you want to win prizes like a MacBook Pro 13, along with a bunch of guides on how to really use their program. Keep in mind, the free version of Wondershare Filmora 10 has a watermark. However, they are currently doing a giveaway. If you leave a comment down below saying what you think of the new version of Wondershare Filmora 10, the Filmora team will be picking out winners to earn a free 1-year license. So again, a big thanks goes to Wondershare Filmora 10 for sponsoring this video. Check that link down below in the video information if you want to try it out for yourself. Now, I don't own an N-Gage, and I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone that does own an N-Gage. I'd be surprised if you did. So in order to play this game, we're gonna have to rely on good old-fashioned emulation. Yes, there is an N-Gage emulator out there. I probably shouldn't be surprised by that. If you are wanting to play this game for yourself on an emulator, or even just want to emulate an N-Gage for whatever reason, I'll put a link down below in the video information to a tutorial on how to install this emulator. The tutorial has an old version of the emulator, but it works the same. Just note that at this part where it says raw dump, on the new version it'll say device dump. Other than that, it's totally the same and it will work fine. But that's also where I need to point out that this emulator doesn't have any way to increase the internal resolution. You probably noticed that it kind of looks like ass right now, and the reason for that is because the N-Gage was originally running at 176 by 208. Yep, that was the resolution for the N-Gage, which shouldn't be surprising. I mean, look how small it is in this person's hands. If you really want to see how small this default resolution is, when you open this emulator and launch the game, it will always open at the default internal resolution. My screen is 1440p. That's how much bigger my screen is. Keep in mind, this was a totally different era. This was all about getting better and better graphics. This is when the PS2 and the original Xbox were around and smartphones didn't exist yet. At this point, everything gaming related was about pushing next-gen graphics. We wanted things to be photorealistic. That's why Crysis was such a big deal just a few years later. To give you a better idea of this time frame, the N-Gage released in 2003, Ashen released in 2004. Half-Life 2, Doom 3, the original Far Cry, and Halo 2 all came out in 2004. The only handheld we had to compare the N-Gage to was the Game Boy Advance. So for the time, this was a pretty ambitious project this is just not where the future went. I mean, it kind of did. Smartphones take the same idea that the N-Gage had, just in a very different form. And then they took the idea of making actual video games on your phone and said, let's just make a bunch of money with microtransactions and leave real games to consoles and PC gamers. Okay, fine, real games, you know what I mean. Anyway, my whole point here was leading to the graphics, which for a handheld game are surprisingly good. Again, yes, looking at this in 2021 with the game stretched way out past what it should be makes it look really bad. But consider how big these environments are for a handheld device in 2004, and that's way ahead of anything else at the time. I was getting heavy Quake vibes while playing this game, both as far as the engine goes and the gameplay, just you don't have as much mobility. The sound effects are also surprisingly decent as well. It kept throwing me off because everything looks all pixelated and old, but then the animations are oddly smooth and the environments are rather large. If this instead was a PC shooter that came out in the mid to late 90s, we may be talking about this game a lot more. But since this came out in the N-Gage, we gotta talk about these weird controls. Now again, I'm not playing this on an N-Gage, so I can't really tell you what it feels like to play on that platform itself, but I can show you a picture of what these controls looked like, and my god, would I not want to use that thing. Emulating it also gives you a pretty decent idea because the default controls are all set to keyboard. Here's how wild the default controls are. Left and right arrow keys make you look left and right. On the numpad, 4 and 6 makes you strafe left and right, 2 and 3 makes you look up and down, pressing 5 makes you shoot. There's more controls than that, but I think you get the point. I'm just gonna use a controller, this is way better. And surprisingly, once I figured out what all of the buttons did, it worked on a controller with modern controls pretty well. My left stick was for movement, my right stick was for aiming, and it felt pretty natural. There was a few downsides though. On the original N-Gage, you were aiming with face buttons, which means the analog stick isn't a true analog stick even if it's mapped to it. You're only getting 8 directions to aim. So that's kind of awkward, but you can get used to it. The other complaint I had was just how it translated to in-game controls. Now, mostly it's fine. I played a lot of 90s shooters, so it felt pretty natural. But this is one of those games where you're walking on ice. When you press forward and let go of forward, you're gonna keep sliding for a good 15 feet. You'll be able to see when I stop moving on the camera, and how far I keep going for. It's like Doom, but 20 times worse. That on itself wouldn't be a problem, but just keep it tucked in your mind because I'll touch on this later. For now, let's briefly talk about the story. The main protagonist got a message from his sister. His sister is a scientist, quite smart, but something seemed wrong. When he gets to her city, it has been completely overrun by aliens or mutants. Whatever these things are. Basically, everyone's dead. As it turns out, your sister was messing with alternate universes, and you have to stop this invasion. They explain it in a much better way than this, but in the end of the day, that's pretty much the whole story. There's also a little bit of sequel baiting at the end for something that will certainly never happen. Not having a deep story is fine. I mean, this is a first-person shooter that came out in 2004 for a gaming phone. The story just exists to point your guns at the next enemy. So let's move on to the gameplay. As I think I said, this reminds me a lot of Quake. There's not a huge variety of enemies, but there is enough to keep your interest. You could say this game is quite engaging. None of the enemies are hit scanners, they all have this slow-moving orange projectile. This is good, it means you can dodge incoming fire. The armor, unlike other games, actually works like armor and completely negates damage for you until it's gone, with the exception of things like fall damage, which makes sense. But it has this usual progression of FPS enemy types. You start with these weak humanoid-looking enemies and these odd crawling enemies. These aren't much of a threat to you, but as you progress along, you get bigger and bigger enemies. Some of them just look like bigger, more jacked versions of the humanoid enemies you were already fighting. Some of the other bigger enemies look like giant glowing anteaters. There's even an enemy that looks like a tripod with a ball sack. This enemy makes the ground shake all around you. Must be hung as these enemies are all different, unique, and they keep your attention. They make the game varied enough to be enjoyable. With the exception of one. By far, the most annoying enemy in the game that got me killed more than anything else are these obnoxious ghost enemies. To make things worse, on the very first level of the game, you're given goggles. When you turn them on, you can see the ghosts fine, but with them turned off, you basically cannot see the ghosts. You may say, well, why don't you just leave them on all the time? Well, one, it looks hideous, and two, it recharges fairly slowly. Yep, that's what that bar on the top is for. If you leave it turned on, it slowly drains and has to recharge. No, that on itself would be mildly annoying. The problem is these enemies are bullshit. The way these enemies are positioned, you usually will not see them before you start taking damage. And by start taking damage, I mean instantly die. Now, these enemies are 100% melee enemies, but it feels like they're rapid-fire machine gun stabbing you. Almost every one of my deaths came from these enemies. The game would have been better without them. Or, you know, without the dumb goggle mechanic, or just nerf them so they don't do so much damage to you. There is one other situation where you'd use these goggles, and that's to see some machinery you need to blow up. Why do these exist? There is genuinely no reason for these goggles to be here. It adds nothing to the game, it's just a nuisance. That said though, the rest of the game isn't too hard. Again, these ghost enemies are the only time I actually died to something in the game. You may be asking what I mean by actually died, and that's because I got soft locked quite a bit while playing through this. On some levels, you have to be careful. Where the geometry sticks out, you can get stuck into it, and now you're screwed. You just have to restart the level. This happened 3 times in total while I was playing the game, but one of those times was right before the final boss, which meant I had to play the whole level again just to get to it, and that sucked. Oh, also I should point out that there are no checkpoints in this game. Why? Before you say, oh, it's an old game, checkpoints weren't common back then. This is 2004. We had checkpoints at that point. I also am pretty sure that you can't make save states with this emulator, so if you die, you just restart that level. This is really dumb. There should be checkpoints, especially since 2 of the levels are heavy on platforming. Remember when I said this game feels like you're on a nice level, but for the whole game? Yeah, try platforming in that. And you have a lot of aerial... Oh, I almost didn't make it. You have a lot of aerial mobility. I pressed the jump button. Nothing happened. That's cool. Time to do the level over again because checkpoints don't exist. Whoever made this level is from hell. Thankfully, that's the only level that goes overboard at the platforming. There's another level where you can fall to your death very easily because you're on rooftops, but it's nowhere near as bad. But to bring positive vibes back, let's talk about the guns, because they're actually surprisingly fun. Your starting pistol is a revolver which will 2-shot the lower tier enemies. It also has a satisfying sound and reload. So hey, your starting pistol isn't garbage. The garbage tier weapon in this game is a recharging weapon that you have purely in case you run out of ammo and to use underwater. It's one of the plasma guns that you can pick up off the aliens. Then you have another pistol, 2 of them to be exact, dual-wielding pistols. Not much to say here. They're pretty effective, pretty fun, unique reload, unique design. And then you get the shotgun. Shotgun. That's a shotgun? The fuck? Doesn't look anything like a shotgun, it looks like a Lewis. What? Despite the fact that it looks like an odd Lewis gun, it is a really good shotgun and will jib enemies. Then you get the machine gun, which looks like a Thompson Hellriegel. This thing is odd, but again, it sounds satisfying and has a nice, smooth reload. The sniper is weird. I've never seen another sniper work this way. It will automatically scope in if you're not moving, meaning you can't shoot while you're moving. It's also kind of hard to aim, just given the platform you're playing on. Getting a sniper rifle to work properly on an N-Gage FPS is not an easy task, and they tried. It kind of works. Could be a lot better, but also could be a lot worse, so eh. After that, you get a grenade launcher / rocket launcher. Depending on the ammo you have, this will be either or. It can somehow fit 5 rockets or grenades in that little tube. Don't know how that works, but I'm not gonna question it. And then you get the Gatling gun. This thing is effective, it's fun, and it almost always jibs enemies. One of the downsides to this game is that it's only around 3 hours long, which, I mean, fair enough. It is an N-Gage game. Other than that, I just don't have much to say. It's decent, it's not perfect, it definitely has problems, but for an N-Gage first-person shooter, it's way better than I expected. If you really want to waste time messing around with an old, forgotten game on a platform that failed miserably, sure, go emulate it. It really does remind me of a Quake game, but on the N-Gage, which is odd to say. But I think that's all I have to talk about when it comes to this game. I want to thank everyone that joined me on Twitch. My Twitch is twitch.tv/JarekTheGamingDragon. If you subscribe, you get to see my videos ahead of time. Also, a big thanks goes to my sponsor, Wondershare Filmora X. Check that link down below in the video information to try it yourself. And of course, a huge thanks goes to everyone that watched this video. This game is more interesting than the other ones. I was really curious about it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next video.